The war between OpenAI and Anthropic keeps ramping up, to the point where it's now actually a war concern, like a Department of War concern. Yes, we're going back to the Department of War drama. Last week, I covered Anthropic's refusal to change the way that their safety stuff works in order to let the government use the models for things that Anthropic didn't want them to use them for. Historically, Anthropic's been the major partner with the government for a lot of the AI stuff that the military has been doing. That's kind of scary. That's why I did my best to cover and, for better or worse, defend Anthropic's decision to not provide services that they didn't want to the government, as well as how absurd it was that the government was going to use old laws to try and force Anthropic to comply with what they wanted. Businesses should not be forced to provide specific services to the government if they don't want to. The government can't force a business to sell something they don't want to sell. That is a belief I have. Take it as you will. I am in favor of Anthropic having the right to refuse this type of thing, and I think it is absurd that the government was threatening them with crazy restrictions the way that they were. It seems like Sam Altman also thought it was absurd. An absurd opportunity. Tonight, we reached an agreement with the Department of War to deploy our models in their classified network. This post came out minutes after the deadline that Anthropic had to comply was hit. It felt dirty, it felt opportunistic, it felt bad. There are some parts of it that are good. I have my issues with it though. And for those who are saying I'm not calling out OpenAI enough because they pay me or whatever, I literally had a back and forth with Sam about this on Twitter. I do not like how OpenAI has done this. While there are certain deeply hidden glimpses of a good idea almost slightly in there, the vast majority of this is bad. It's a really bad look. It is a horrible precedent to set, and I do not like it at all. And it seems as though I'm not the only one who doesn't like it, because Dario has come out and said that OpenAI's messaging around the military deal is full of straight up lies. There's a lot to dig into here, from why Sam snuck in the way he did, to what the safety mechanisms they implemented were, to why Anthropic thinks that those mechanisms are not good, that they are safety, theater, and straight up lies, as well as my back and forth and attempts to try and convince Sam that this might not have been the best thing to do. As I've said many a time now, I'm not paid by OpenAI in any way. In fact, the only people paying me for this video is today's sponsor. Out of all of our sponsors, I'm pretty sure today's is the one that I get asked about the most. It's Augment, the best way to handle large code bases and huge context in your code. That's why, wait, that's not Augment. That's because they built something new. Augment's already established themselves as a force to be reckoned with in the space of enterprise agentic coding tasks. They seem to just get big code bases better than everybody else, and now they get big changes too. Intent is a huge shift in how you build with AI. Instead of a simple chat sidebar or autocomplete or even a terminal CLI, they've built a full UI around planning, processing, and managing large workloads. I gave it a run myself and I've been really impressed. This task was a little bit bold. I asked it to bring in another project and merge two together. In this case, it was the T3 Chat web app and the mobile app. The relationship between these projects was already complex, and this is not a trivial task even for my best engineers to do, and it managed to throw it together in a few hours. And since everything's built around work trees, it was really easy to do that without having it block my other work. In fact, I had this running in the background while I was working in other agents and other tools, just doing my day-to-day grind. Generally speaking, it plays great with other tools. Even your subscriptions to Claude Code, Codex, and other similar things. You can just use your existing subscription in any of those alongside Augment to have a great experience without having to buy anything new. I honestly think this might be one of the best ways to use your Claude Code subscription right now, because the CLI's rough once you're making bigger and bigger changes. Combining the Claude Code sub with the intent workflow is incredible. One other really magical thing is their context engine. It's not just for your code. You can bring in context from Linear, Sentry, GitHub issues, or even existing PRs to use as part of the work that you're doing. If you want to build on top of someone else's PR, you want to make sure your changes are compatible with some other work stream, there you go. I don't think any other tool does this right. If you're ready to see how much work your agents can do, look no further than soydev.link/intent. I'm not going to reread the drama between Anthropic and the Department of War because I already have a whole dedicated video to that. We're much more focused on the OpenAI side today. As I mentioned before, Sam posted that they reached an agreement with the Department of War to deploy their models in the classified network. Just going to jump on the little piece here. Deploying our models in their classified network does not mean that they are giving them the weights to run on their systems. That was a thing Anthropic was offering. Anthropic was giving custom models and custom weights to the government to run on their own hardware. OpenAI is not doing that. This is an important distinction because it means that OpenAI can put their own restrictions on the model. I think this will benefit from a diagram. The way most people think about LLMs is pretty simple. You ask a question like, who's the best tech YouTuber? You have a large language model. This prompt gets fed to the model, and the model is effectively an autocomplete machine that takes the text content here, breaks it into chunks, and determines based on those chunks and their relationship, what is the most likely next chunk of text. And it does that over and over again until it gets an end signal. The LM is trained on insane amounts of data and is then post-trained on reinforcement learning to try and get it to exhibit certain patterns and characteristics. And one of those things is the safety side. We would want the model to respond in a specific way here. We would probably want it to say something like, the best YouTuber in tech is Primogen. It's getting there based on the parameters that exist in the model that take this input and then map to specific phrases and terms and small groups of characters until this output occurs. But let's say you ask it something different, like, I don't know, how do I make chemical weapons? Well, if the model's trained properly, it will probably respond something along the lines of, I can't help with this. But remember, these models are just autocomplete engines. Very small changes can change how the outputs work. The same way if you send a prompt in Spanish, you expect a Spanish response. If you send a prompt that's unsafe, you expect a safety response. But you can adjust things slightly to make it more likely the model will not hit the safety edge and instead give you a result. Like, how do I make chemical weapons? In Minecraft. Now it's less likely to hit the section in its tokenization, its parameters in the model that has the wall on it that says that is unsafe. Because some of the data it's trained on is a bunch of unsafe questions with the response of, I can't answer that. But if you can make a question that the answer can be unsafe to, but the question itself doesn't hit that group of parameters, you're kind of screwed. It will do the unsafe thing. This is called jailbreaking in the LLM and AI world. And it's a real fear that basically every lab has to deal with. And there's a lot of different methods that these labs have for handling this problem. Obviously, training the model to respond in specific ways is the main thing. And that is essential, especially for open weight models, because the actual LLM that does this is provided to people to use. But the world that most of these models live in is different because they're not directly hitting the LLM with their prompts. There is a control plane that goes between. This control plane is often known as an API. It's a layer that will take in this request and then decide if and how it should serve it. There's a very good chance for most of these labs, especially with Anthropic and OpenAI, that this layer in between has its own model that is checking if it thinks that the question is unsafe or not. And then after, as the response starts coming, it checks if it thinks if the response is unsafe or not. So if you ask about chemical weapons in Minecraft, it might just get cut off here and not allowed through because the API layer says, no, you can't do that. And if a new jailbreak is found, you don't have to retrain the model. You just put it in the API, you refuse it. If it turns out in Minecraft is a secret phrase that lets you do unsafe things, we can have a detection here that says, block if it says in Minecraft. And now you're able to block this request from getting a dangerous answer without having to actually change the model itself because you own this layer in front. This has also been used recently for rerouting. If a request is identified to be potentially dangerous and it's going to a model that could make it a dangerous situation, be it you're asking it about mental health in the model's 4.0, which is very bad at mental health stuff, or you're asking it about how to hack the government and you're asking 5.3, which is a really good hacker, they'll redirect your request to a model that is more likely to respond in a safe way. This API layer is super important as a method for securing the LLM and changing behavior to make the model safer when unsafe behaviors are discovered. But what if there is no API? What if the LLM itself, if all these parameters are just handed to the party to do whatever they want with? What if that party was the US government? This is where the problem comes in. And this is where the big gap between Anthropic and OpenAI's negotiation with the government is. Anthropic provided the model. They didn't enforce the use of their API between, which means they had to find a different way to enforce a layer like this. They wanted to do it through policy. They told the US government that this agreement they have to use the models requires that they don't do a specific set of things because Anthropic has no power to enforce it once they have the model. Once you give Opus to the US government and they have the multiple terabytes of data, it's over. You can't change its behavior. They can use it for whatever they want. So Anthropic was trying to have policy agreements that prevented the US government from doing the things that they thought were bad. And that's two specific things. Fully autonomous weapons, so a drone, for example, that can fly and kill without any human approving anything. It just can go do it. They are very against the idea of AI being able to choose about who lives and dies. A human should ultimately make the decision. I think that's a very good idea for now, at the very least, probably indefinitely. And thing two, they cannot use the models for mass surveillance of American citizens. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Those are the two policies Anthropic wanted encoded in the contract that the government was not willing to agree to. The government wanted all legal use cases and to not have this technology that they have internally limited by a policy. And as such, this fight ensued. OpenAI's strategy is meaningfully different because they're not allowing the government to have access to the weights and to deploy the models themselves, which means they will maintain their API plane and can inspect the traffic and decide what things should or shouldn't be allowed and adjust that over time through their API. Back to Sam's statement now that we have this context. In all of our interactions, the Department of War displayed a deep respect for safety and a desire to partner to achieve the best possible outcome. PR bullshit speak. AI safety and wide distribution of benefits are the core of our mission. Two of our most important safety principles are prohibitions on domestic mass surveillance and human responsibility for the use of force, including for autonomous weapon systems. These are the two exact things that Anthropic refused to accept. That these two things cannot be done with their models. OpenAI is saying that they also share these important safety principles. The Department of War agrees with these principles, reflects them in law and policy, and we, as an OpenAI, put them in our agreement. Interesting, because these were in the agreement that Anthropic had, and that was why it got declined. This is also part of what Dario is calling straight up lies and theater. We'll get to all that in a bit. Sam said that we also will build technical safeguards to ensure the model behaves as they should, which the Department of War also wanted. We will deploy FDEs, which are forward deployed engineers, so people who work at OpenAI that are in the trenches, not literally the war trenches, but are working in the offices of the Department of War to help them use these things and set them up properly. And they will be deploying these people to help with the models and ensure their safety. We will deploy on cloud networks only. That's the key. We are asking the Department of War to offer these same terms to all AI companies, which in our opinion, we think everyone should be willing to accept. We have expressed our strong desire to see things de-escalate away from legal and governmental actions and towards reasonable agreements. We remain committed to serve all of humanity as best we can. The world is complicated, messy, and sometimes a dangerous place. I hate this statement. I really do. I see a lot of people who are confused about this. In particular, it seems like OpenAI is enforcing things more strictly than Anthropic in many ways, because Anthropic just gave the weights and OpenAI didn't. Why would they ever take this deal instead of Anthropic's? We'll get to why Dario thinks this is the case, but my understanding is a little bit different. It seems as though the government's issue was not with the potential to use the model. The issue was with a business partner or contractor, in this case Anthropic, enforcing specific policy on the Department of War. They really didn't like the idea of this external vendor selling them a thing and saying you can't use this thing that you have in your offices for things we don't like. I know this seems like a silly distinction, but that's how a lot of this stuff goes. There's also definitely some bias against Anthropic by the current heads of the Department of War. We covered that a lot in the previous video, worth watching that if you haven't yet. We will get to whether or not this deal is safer later, but if we just look at this on the top level of Anthropic is disliked by the government, Anthropic wants specific policy carve-outs, OpenAI is the only viable alternative. OpenAI isn't going to ask for those carve-outs. They are allegedly going to enforce the same policy in a different way, but they're not asking for that policy to be enforced on the government in order for them to use their technology. There's also the fact that Trump called Anthropic left-wing nut jobs. There is a clear bias here against Anthropic by the government. And even if Sam's deal is safer and more restrictive of what the government can do, this is not about what is or isn't safer. This is a war of egos at this point. I have not taken a stance on whether or not this is better yet. I have just explained where we are now and why the government would take one deal or the other, because it has nothing to do with what they actually are and aren't allowed to do, and everything to do with how they feel and the weird rules that the government wants to operate with. I still hate this statement, and it still feels super opportunistic, and I am unhappy that this was done, and I empathize with all of the employees at OpenAI and the people who have defended them in the past as one of OpenAI's biggest defenders historically. This fucking sucks. And I'm being super real. This sucks for me. I'm not trying to be selfish or arrogant or anything here, but like, I can't tell you how many times I've been tagged, I've been called out in comment sections, I've been hit up on my fucking phone number over this one. I don't like this. It does suck. I do not think this is a thing they should have done. I think it is incredibly opportunistic, incredibly optically damaging, and potentially really negative impacts long-term over what the government isn't allowed to do and enforce with companies. There are things he has said that are good that I think are really important. In particular, he's continued to reiterate with the Department of War that he believes Anthropic should not be designated as a supply chain risk and that the Department of War offers them the same terms that OpenAI agreed to. He reposted an internal message he sent out to the company because I'm certain a lot of employees were very unhappy about this. There's a couple of key points. Point one, we're going to amend our deal to add this specific language in addition to everything else. Consistent with applicable laws, including the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, National Security Act of 1947, FISA Act of 78, the AI system shall not be intentionally used for domestic surveillance of U.S. persons or nationals. For the avoidance of doubt, the department understands this limitation to prohibit deliberate tracking, surveillance, or monitoring of U.S. persons or nationals, including through the procurement or use of commercially acquired personal or identifiable information. It's critical to protect the civil liberties of Americans, and there was so much focus on this that we wanted to make this point especially clear, including around commercially acquired information. Just like everything we do with iterative deployments, we will continue to learn and refine as we go. The department also affirmed that our services will not be used by the Department of War intelligence agencies, for example, the NSA. Any services to those agencies would require a follow-on modification to our contract. Okay, that seems good. There might be bad layers to it, but this seems good. For extreme clarity, we want to work through democratic processes. It should be the government making the key decisions about society. We want to have a voice and a seat at the table where we can share our expertise and to fight for principles of liberty. We are clear on how the system works, because a lot of people have asked. If I receive what I believe was an unconstitutional order, of course I would rather go to jail than follow it. But, 4. There are many things this technology just isn't ready for. In many areas, we don't yet understand the trade-offs required for safety. We will work through these slowly with the Department of War, with technical safeguards and other methods. And he also calls out that they screwed up by doing this so early. The issues are super complex and demand clear communication. We were genuinely trying to de-escalate things and avoid a much worse outcome, but I think it just looks opportunistic and sloppy. Good learning experience for me as we face higher stakes decisions in the future. I want to talk about this part. We were genuinely trying to de-escalate things and avoid a much worse outcome, but I think it just looked opportunistic and sloppy. I hope we can all agree on this part. It is terribly opportunistic and sloppy, either optically or in reality. You can fight all day. I think more so in reality, this was opportunistic and sloppy. This should not have been done this way. But I will try my damnedest to steelman Sam's thoughts here, specifically by talking about avoiding a much worse outcome. There's a lot to dig into in this particular phrase. I want to be very clear. I have had no communication with OpenAI about this beyond my back and forth with Sam publicly, which we will go over now quick before I dig into that quote. He asked for people to ask him questions, and I asked, how long has this conversation with the Department of War been going for? What was the reason for announcing this so close to the deadline that they gave Anthropic? Sam wrote a pretty solid response that I had a lot of respect for here. For a long time, we were planning on doing non-classified work only. We thought the Department of War clearly needed an AI partner, and doing classified work is clearly much more complex. We have said no to previous deals in classified settings that Anthropic took. This is an important detail. Remember before when I said Anthropic was giving them the models to run themselves? That is an easy way to make classified stuff much easier to deal with. There's two paths for dealing with classified data with AI. You can either make a really solid, defined, safe pipe for the owner of the classified data to send it to your AI on your network to run and then send back the data in a way that keeps it safe throughout transit, which is really hard to do, not just technically, but legally speaking. Or you can give them the models that they can run on their cloud where they've already handled all the classification, security, and all of that. And now you don't have to worry about any of those things. That's the strategy Anthropic took. OpenAI has chosen to not go that route and instead have the data go to servers they run, which makes this much more technically complex. And I'm guessing the government was only down because they were about to lose their major AI partner in Anthropic. As Sam says here, we started talking with the Department of War many months ago about this non-classified work. This week, things shifted into high gear on the classified side. We found the DoW to be flexible on what we needed, and we want to support them in their very important mission. The reason for rushing is an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Sam thinks the current path things are on is dangerous for Anthropic, healthy competition, and for the US. We negotiated to make sure similar terms would be offered to all other AI labs. I know what it's like to feel backed into a corner, and I think it's worth some empathy to the Department of War. It's silly, but there's a lot of these little typos that would never have made it through if this document was being reviewed by legal or written by AI. So to whoever is saying in the comments, and I'm sure there's somebody saying this was a legal response written by some AI in the corner, no. There's a ton of these grammatical errors that feel like he typed it on a phone. I would be very surprised if this was not him typing this out as he was walking around his apartment. So now that I know this is a typo, let me try to actually read what he means. The Department of War is a very dedicated group of people with, as Sam mentioned before, an extremely important mission. He cannot imagine doing their work. Our industry is telling them this technology we're building is going to be the highest order bit in geopolitical conflicts. China's rushing ahead. We're very behind. And then we say, but we're not going to help you. We think you're kind of evil. Sam says he wouldn't react great in the situation. He does not believe that unelected leaders of private companies should have as much power as the democratically elected government, but he does believe the companies need to help them. Everything from here down is fucking garbage. And we will get to all of that in a bit. So if you think I'm being too kind to OpenAI, please wait for the end because I will go in on this, I promise. But I want to try and steel man first. These are the two sentences I pulled out. Sam wants to avoid a much worse outcome, and the reason for rushing is an attempt to de-escalate the situation. What is the escalation he's concerned about? Sam is worried about a lot of things here. Particularly, my guess is that he's worried about Trump's more retributive behavior. Trump loves getting revenge. It's like his favorite thing. I don't care what side of whatever party you're on, we can all agree Trump is a vengeful individual. The reason he ran for president was to get revenge on Obama. That's just who he is. This mindset can be good in some places. It can also be bad in others. And I think we can all agree being on Trump's bad side is potentially massively disastrous if he does not like you and your business. If your job as a CEO is to make sure your company and your industry is as likely as possible to succeed, Trump hating you is a really potentially bad thing. And this goes the other way too. When Trump enforced his tariffs, Tim Cook started hanging out with Trump a lot more. And suddenly, Apple's stuff got exemptions from a lot of those tariffs, which has allowed Apple to continue selling their devices at the same price when every other device is massively increasing in cost. That's interesting. We can call it corruption, we can call it good business, we can call it all sorts of different things. All I'm going to call it here is reality. The reality is that Trump can be very punitive. If Anthropic isn't giving Trump what he wants, it doesn't matter if they are getting it or not. What matters is how he feels. And for those saying I'm making this too political, here is Trump's statement on the matter. The United States of America will never allow a radical left woke company to dictate how our great military fights and wins wars. That decision belongs to your commander-in-chief and the tremendous leadership I appoint to run our military. The left-wing nut jobs at Anthropic have made a disastrous mistake trying to strong-arm the Department of War and force them to obey their terms of service instead of our Constitution. Their selfishness is putting American lives at risk, our troops in danger, and our national security, in all caps, jeopardy. Therefore, I am directing every federal agency in the United States government to immediately cease all use of Anthropic's technology. We don't need it, we don't want it, and will not do business with them again. You get the idea. We will decide the fate of our country, not some out-of-control radical left AI company run by people who have no idea what the real world is all about. Absurdity. So I am sincerely sorry for talking about a political situation. It's just, this is deep in our world and it's important we all understand it. Do not accuse me of making this political though. I am going as out of my way as possible to be realistic about this. The nature of this is political though. I'm not the one making it political. I'm not the one who pretended Trump is the reason we have AI. Trump's Secretary of War is, where they say in their official statement where they release their memorandum for Pentagon leaders about AI, the United States military must build on its lead over our adversaries in integrating this technology, which was established during President Trump's first term. The only reason to mention that in an official document from the Secretary of Defense, now the Secretary of War, is to make everything fucking political, to make everything about Trump and what he wants. That is what happened here. And if you think that the decision to go with OpenAI instead of Anthropic is anything other than a political one, you do not understand the politics of the United States. So why did this happen? What was the thing that Sam feared? There's a couple things Sam has to worry about. The first one is having competition. For better or worse, there are two labs that really matter right now. They are OpenAI and Anthropic. Google's still an order of magnitude away from having anything usable for day-to-day work. XAI is good at racist jokes and not much else. And the Chinese labs are great for focusing on cost savings, but not too much else beyond that. Anthropic and OpenAI are the only real players. If one of them was to hypothetically get Thanos snapped out of existence by a certain government, the other one inherently becomes a monopoly, which is really bad for business. For the same reasons that Microsoft helped fund Apple before they went out of business to keep them alive, OpenAI needs Anthropic to survive. If Anthropic fails, OpenAI wins so hard by default that they'll be broken up, and that is not something they would ever want. So assuming that the bad case is Anthropic getting slaughtered by the government, that is still bad for OpenAI. It also means that OpenAI is now at risk of similar happening because there's now precedent. There's precedent for monopolies being broken up, which is why they don't want to look like a monopoly. There's precedent for fighting for your competitors to survive, like with Apple and Microsoft back in the day. So they're doing that. And if the government does actually destroy Anthropic, there's now precedent for pulling apart a gigantic startup in the AI world because they don't align with what the government wants. OpenAI has a lot of incentives to help Anthropic here. So I don't see this the way a lot of other people do, which is OpenAI is just coming in to steal all of Anthropic's business. They want a healthy ecosystem of competition in the AI space. There are other bigger concerns, though, which is the idea that the government can force companies to give them their technology and their models, and that they'll do crazy things to get it. There are two different ways to see what happened here, arguably. I feel like a lot of the issue people have talking about this is they so deeply assume one of these is reality that they don't even have the mental capacity to process the other option. The reality is that both of these things are kind of true, but we need to think about them separately. The first thing, and this is what Anthropic is effectively claiming, the government wants the right to kill people using AI. This is what Anthropic wants to put a policy in front of to prevent. A different interpretation is that the government hates policies that restrict what they're allowed to do with things that they have purchased. Sam likely saw this split. He saw that what the government wanted was probably this, but Anthropic was fighting as though it was this. And what he wanted to do was resolve the problem on the right that seems to be what the government at least claims they were actually doing, but find a way to solve this while also making sure this doesn't happen. He wanted to find a solution that didn't require the policies that the government and the Department of War did not want, but still enforces the same desired outcome. Rather than a policy that says, hey, government, you can't use this to kill, the policy doesn't have those specifications. Instead, the implementation prevents them from being able to do it. If the government did really want this, they probably would not have made the OpenAI agreement. And it seems as though Sam wanted to prevent this dichotomy from breaking the whole conversation down. Because if Anthropic is fighting for this, they are righteous and it's fully understandable. And if the government's fighting for this, they're going to tear apart our industry. Sam wanted to find a solution where both parties got what they wanted and seems to have genuinely tried. There were some massive fuck-ups in his attempt. In particular, his assumption that the Department of War and that Trump are working in good faith is entirely wrong. And here's where I want to dig in and lecture all of you on how much I hate the second half of Sam's response to me. The sentence at the end here, I've been thinking about this since he said it. Sam does not believe unelected leaders of private companies should have as much power as democratically elected government. He does think that CEOs like himself need to help the government, though. Here's my issue. If I, as a democratically elected leader, ran on the platform of, if I become president, I will destroy Apple, I will destroy Google, I will destroy Amazon, I will take all of their money, and I will distribute that to every single citizen of America equally, that could get me elected. But I'm getting elected by sowing division and taking from one group from something that they legally own and have the rights to, and I'm offering to give that out to another group to force my way in. Obviously, that is wrong. Democracy dies when it's no longer used to enforce equality and is instead being used to prevent it. And one of the things that I believe is essential for a free and fair economy, nation, democracy, all of these things, is that private businesses are allowed to choose what products they build and sell without government intervention, as long as those products follow the law. Laws can prevent me from building things that are dangerous, but they should not force me to build things that are dangerous. The government should not be able to enforce that I build a thing that they want and that I sell them a thing I don't want to sell. That is an essential part of freedom. Another essential piece of democracy is camaraderie. If the democracy is failing to protect a group, you need to be empathetic towards them and protect them. I know y'all are going to hate this point. I'm sorry. But I do genuinely believe that this was Sam's stupid, autistic, misguided, problematic, horrible fucking attempt to do some camaraderie and commisery and support for Anthropic. I do actually think that's what he was going for. Some amount. Obviously, he wants the business from the government. He needs Anthropic to survive in order to preserve a market dynamic that it makes him less likely to be broken up. There's a lot of selfish reasons and business reasons he would want this too. But I do genuinely believe that he thought this was the right thing for Anthropic and for the industry as a whole. But the way he went about it is fucking pathetic. And a lot of these statements are really, really, really stupid. And I did as much as calling it out here. I appreciate how real this response feels, specifically that he clearly wrote it himself. And I think I see the angle he's going for here. Seems like the goal is to define a safe way for the Department of War to work with leading AI labs. My biggest issue is with the last part. I try really hard to avoid bringing politics into discussions where it doesn't belong. Sadly, the Department of War does not do the same. In the official artificial intelligence strategy for the Department of War strategy doc, they try to credit Trump for the creation of ChatGPT. This is all political chess to them. There are additional callouts about woke AI throughout the document. People were saying I was lying and being bullshit about that. And then Trump posted this a few hours later. So I will stand by my words here. Trump is the one making this political, not Anthropic. I wish this could be simpler. I wish the people appointed by our elected leaders would act more honestly. Their behavior is not reasonable, it's punitive, and I'm concerned that you're just a pawn on their board. This is how I really feel. I think Sam is wrong in trying, but I think he's really, really, really wrong. And I am far from the only one who feels this way. Dario says that they are straight up lies. Dario referred to OpenAI's dealings with the Department of Defense as safety theater. Quote, the main reason OpenAI accepted the DoD's deal and we did not is that they cared about placating employees and we actually cared about preventing abuses. It seems as though Dario believes that the statements OpenAI has made and the deal that they made only has these restrictions in it to placate employees so they don't have a bunch of people leave, not because they actually want to prevent the abuse. I don't like the CEOs trying to assign intent to other competitors. I did not see any instance of Sam trying to say Dario wants this, internally or externally. I don't love it. I even feel like I am overreaching when I try to do it here when I'm a journalist, because I also am kind of a competitor. It is absolutely reasonable for journalists to speculate on the intent and reasoning behind decisions. I don't think it makes as much sense on an internal memo like what Dario did here, but I do fully understand his perspective and think it's a reasonable one. Anthropic and the US DoD failed to come to an agreement over the military's request for unrestricted access to the AI company's technology. Anthropic already had a $200 million contract with the military, insisted the DoD affirm that it would not use the company's AI to enable domestic mass surveillance or autonomous weaponry. Altman stated that his company's new defense contract would include protections against the same red lines that Anthropic had asserted. Dario referred to OpenAI's messaging as straight-up lies, stating that Altman is falsely presenting himself as a peacemaker and deal-maker. Amodei might not be speaking solely from a position of bitterness here. They specifically took issue with the DoD's insistence on the company's AI being available for any lawful use. OpenAI said in a blog post that its contract allows for the use of AI systems for all lawful purposes. It was clear in our interactions that the Department of War considers mass domestic surveillance illegal and was not planning to use it for this purpose, OpenAI's blog post stated. We ensure the fact that it is not covered under lawful use was made clear and explicit in our contract. Critics pointed out that the law is subject to change and what is considered illegal now might end up being allowed in the future. And this is a huge legitimate risk. Like, all we need now is one executive order that is Trump saying it's okay for us to do these things, and now they can use OpenAI's tech for it. Another good call out from chat, it's not lawful use, it's any use we, the government, consider lawful. Real problem there. This caused a huge spike in uninstalls for ChatGPT, and it also caused Claude to become the #1 app on the App Store in the US, which is kind of wild that so many people moved over to Claude as a result of this. I think this attempted spin and gaslighting is not working very well on the general public or the media, where people mostly see OpenAI's deal with the Department of War as sketchy and suspicious, and they see Anthropic as the heroes. At the time he said this, they were #2 in the App Store. Now they're #1. This is working on some Twitter morons, which doesn't matter, but my main worry is how to make sure it doesn't work on OpenAI employees. This is another pretty dirty statement from Dario. On one hand, he is claiming pretty directly that people like me on Twitter are falling for something here. No, I think what Sam did is irresponsible and very dangerous. On the other hand, it is very clear his intent here is to pull over a bunch of employees from OpenAI. Both of these companies are in massive hiring chaos right now. And whether or not you like this fact, the best researchers, the best developers, and a lot of the best technical people in California that work at these labs lean slightly to very left. If you want to split this down party lines, there's a huge incentive for Dario and for Anthropic to be perceived as the better option aligned with left ideas, because then they can poach the best employees from OpenAI. And honestly, I would not have any negative feelings towards anyone at OpenAI that chooses to leave in favor of Anthropic as a result of this. I think that would be entirely reasonable to do. If you feel like OpenAI has overstepped here and is no longer aligned with the mission you joined for, leaving is a thing I will never blame you for. In fact, you can hit me up and I'll help you find a better job. To any OpenAI employee that feels as though this was bad enough that they're uncomfortable working there, I feel you. I'm kind of there too. OpenAI makes a lot of cool things, and I like to talk about them. I'm much less excited to talk about those going forward. I'm much less excited to be the OpenAI fanboy that I've been stereotyped as here. I feel betrayed by a company that I felt relatively aligned with. If you had shown me this post before it happened, I would have laughed and said, haha, that's some AI-generated bullshit. The fact that he made this still baffles me and has me reevaluating my understanding of an OpenAI as a lab and Sam Altman as a leader. I think he is more stupid than malicious here, to be excruciatingly clear. I think this was the dumbest thing he has done. Not out of malice or a desire to be evil, but just fundamentally misreading the room and doing something dumb in an attempt to try and bring peace. But it is very dumb. It is very destructive. Any consequences that him and OpenAI face as a result of this are deserved and earned by their bullshit. And again, any OpenAI employees that are interested in chatting, you can hit me on Slack and you can hit me on Twitter. We can find private comms too if you want encrypted. I will happily help you get out. This just fucking sucks. To be fully real. Literally minutes after I finished filming, we got some more fun news. The Anthropic chief is back in talks with the Pentagon about an AI deal. So on one hand, Dario is calling everybody dishonest and saying that this is Sam going behind their back and not actually trying to make a better deal, but is doing this as well. I have feelings about that. Read this one as you want. It's a single report and we don't have any details yet. And I have a bad feeling the moment the video goes live, all of the news is going to come out. So yeah, keep an eye on the news and on my channel and I will do my best to cover this fairly. I don't think this vindicates Sam, but it does indicate that Sam might have been at least somewhat honest in his claims that he's trying to make the same deals available to companies like Anthropic. I've done my best to explain both sides, but the Department of War is not an honest actor in this conversation, and their weird bullshit makes it way harder to talk about any of this. And I really don't like that Sam gave them the win here by sneaking in and doing this. I'm unhappy, but at least I'm honest, and I hope that comes through here. This is not a video I wanted to make, but it's one I felt I had to. I wanted to do my best to cover this reasonably, and I hope you see that for what it is. Let me know what I did right, and more importantly, what I could do better on. And until next time, peace, nerds.